Hi Booktube, it's Roz coming to you from a very nice apartment on the outskirts of Naples, and it's 3/4, well, at least 2/3 of the way through April, and I'm finally going to do a March wrap-up of my delights, discoveries and disappointments for the month, because I literally just haven't had the chance up to now. But I'll try and make it kind of quite succinct, because A, it's late, and B, I haven't got any Wi-Fi here, so uploading it's going to be a pain. So what happened in March? I read 14 books, finished 14 books in March, and took part in 7 readathons. That sounds like a lot, but actually, I kind of use them to prompt me to make a choice from things I've perhaps had in mind to read anyway, or so, it's not as ridiculous as it sounds. I was also reading for the Booktube Prize in March, and I did a wrap-up of my 6 translated fiction Group A books, and said what I thought of them. And I struck lucky. I had 6 good books, even though, I liked some more than others. They were all, I think some people are quite tough groups, so, lucky old me. I also read a play this month to do discussing drama with Tilly. That was by Lope de Vega, but I won't talk about that because we did a video. So, but that was picked to run alongside my March of the Mammoth's choice, Don Quixote. And I got halfway through that in March. I'm getting towards the end of it now in April, and I will save talking about that at the end of April. But what an experience it's been. So let's do March. Now, the absolute top delight and discovery of the month for me was a book that I read solely because of the prompt of it being Dewithon. Dewithon is like the Welsh readathon, which I've never taken part in before, and seeing it on Heather, the soggy expat book nerd, if I got that right. Anyway, wonderful channel. She reminded me about Dewithon, and I thought, I'm going to read, finally, One Moonlit Night by Caradoc Pritchard. Now, he wrote that in Welsh. It was published in 1961. It was translated into English in 1995 by Philip Mitchell, who was studying it for his Welsh A level and thought, why isn't there a version of this in English? This is a wonderful book that, everyone in the UK should get to read. And I'm ashamed to say it's the first book that I have ever read that was translated from the Welsh, even though Wales is part of my country. There you go. It's such a good book that I'm going to do a scallywandling video that's like a sole review about this, as the one book that I've read that's actually in Welsh from Wales. It will suffice to say, I think, that it's a dark, funny, sad, poetic, rich novel, or novella really, that I would recommend to anyone who doesn't need their novels to be kind of totally sort of predictable and linear. Okay, and it's sort of got a child narrator, which could be really risky and iffy for me, and it's in the first person, and no problem, it was spot on. I really rate it. So, but I will give that the attention it deserves in another video. So I also had 2 delights reading for the Irish readathon, because I read Leonard and Hungry Paul by Ronan Hession and What Willow Says by Lynn. Now, Leonard and Hungry Paul is the debut novel by the Irish novelist Ronan Hession, who has popped up on Sean's channel a couple of times talking about books, and I think Brian first recommended the Leonard and Hungry Paul to me. It is a very gentle, lovely book, kind of about being kind, and you don't get a lot of books about kindness, do you? And it was delightful. Not like, a big mind-blowing book, just delightful and rich and not too sugary. Now, when Ronan has popped up on Sean's The Book Maniacs channel, he often, or on occasion, he recommends other books by other Irish novelists, and one that he strongly recommended was What Willow Says by Lynn. So that was the other one that I read. Now this is a sad book. Don't read it if you don't like to be a little bit emotional reading a book. It's about a young girl whose mother's died and she's living with her grandmother. She's deaf, and her grandmother is kind of learning to communicate with her and sign, and both like official BSL signing, and also they develop their own kind of family signs, which, you know, is a typical thing in deaf families, I think. I say it's a sad book, and it is, but it is also full of joy and loveliness and trees and family relationships and poetic language, and a real celebration of deafness and communication. Definitely. Thank you, Ronan, for recommending it, and I recommend it on to anyone watching this. And probably the best known March readathon is March Mystery Madness. It's one that I've dipped into before, and I dipped into it again. I kind of used it as an excuse to get to read the second in the Peter posthumous sequence of crime novels, and there's three. They're by Britta Bolt, which is actually Britta Buller of Booktube fame, and her partner in crime, Rodney Bolt. I really hope they write more. I've got one to go in the trilogy, but you know, write some more, please. Why do I love them? They're in that kind of sweet spot for me with crime of not being cozy, nor being kind of horrific and, you know, unnecessarily gory or exploitative. They're sort of a bit political. They've got some sort of running characters, particularly Pete himself, who you're really attached to, and it's a lovely setting with a strong sense of place in Amsterdam. So this is the one I read, was Lives Lost, which came out in 2015. But start at the beginning of the series if you're going to read them. Middle grade March is another kind of March, I know, institution, not a big one for me, but I did use it as a reason to reread a book from my childhood, Edith Nesbit's The Story of the Treasure Seekers, which was published in 1899. I hasten to add that my childhood was in 1899, but it was a book that my mother loved and she read to me, and, you know, yeah. Edith Nesbit is a really interesting personality. What struck me reading the book this time as an adult is that she's a real chronicler of the late Victorian, early Edwardian middle class. So, you know, you read children's books from that era and there might be sort of people who live in kind of mansions or palaces, you know what I mean, or you know, like you know, like The Secret Garden, you know, she's living in this huge, you know, mansion with park and servants, you know, and then, or you get the sort of, I don't know, children being sent up chimneys end of things, but you don't. What Nesbit does is she kind of gets in the middle there in southeast London, the kind of family where the children would be at private schools, but they can't go at the moment because their father's business is failing. You know, it's yeah, they're sort of on the, yeah, somewhere in the middling, and she really understands children. She is best known for her book, The Railway Children. I think they're making another film of that now. I like this one as well, but if you're only going to read one book by her, read Five Children in It, which has a kind of fantasy element, but yeah, it's brilliant. Now, that's five readathons. Sixth one I took part in was, well, I said in my March TBR, I think I'm going to read five different things, 5 different readathons. Are there any others that I've missed? And someone pointed out Caradoc. Fortunately, one of my Booktube prize books was by an author from Korea, so I kind of cheatedly, you know, slipped that one in. But then the other one that I heard about, which I was so pleased that I did, was her Storyathon. And I definitely will look out for that again next year, because it's a readathon about women's history and women historical fiction. And I used that to get me to finally read Matrix by Lauren Groff. Well, I say finally, it only came out in 2021, but it's, you know, it was a big book last year and a real Marmite book. And I wasn't sure if I was, you know, would I be one of the lovers or the haters? I was one of the lovers. Well, you know, it was a solid 4-star book for me, put it that way. It's set in the 12th century Abbey, and Groff, she takes, one of the complaints about it, okay, that I saw in reviews was that it's not historical enough. It's historical fiction, but that she sort of plays fast and loose with her main character, who's sort of based on Marguerite de France, but actually she's based it on 3 or 4 different characters. And I studied history. I didn't care that it wasn't hugely historically accurate. She's using that 12th century monastery, full of nuns, as a way to write about a closed community of women, I guess, and with I love the ideas, I love the language, I love the structure, the way you get chunks in lots of detail and suddenly you leap forward several years. For me, it wasn't kind of realistic in a historical way, or even in a some odd things happen, but really stimulating, really enjoyable. I definitely I'm definitely on the thumbs up side for that one. What else did I manage to squeeze into March, apart from things that were Booktube Prize or readathon related? I have been, as you know if you watch my channel regularly, making an effort this year to really engage with graphic fiction and non-fiction, and I read 2 things that related to that this month. One was Park Bench by Christoph Chabouté, and that's a wordless graphic novel that it's as if he's got one of those stop motion cameras sort of trained at a park bench in somewhere in France. It looks very French, very lovely, and captures the people that come and sit on it or move around it or skateboard over it or sleep on it, or and lots happen. There's lots of incident. It's not kind of thick with plot or characterization, but it's kind of subtle and gentle and a lovely read. The other one I read was a second book by Alison Bechdel, and that was, now I had to write down the title because I always get the title of this wrong. I don't know why. The Secret to Superhuman Strength. There, got it right. And this is basically a memoir through the medium of exercise fads. All the exercise fads that she's taken part in across her life. And that's a kind of great way of kind of introducing each different decade of her life, I guess. Alongside that, there's a certain amount of romanticism, romantic poets, romantic writers, and British philosophy. But what a strange combination. It works just about her. I love her style of illustration and so on. It didn't sweep me off my feet the way Fun Home did, which was her memoir about her father and her childhood that I read first. But she has a special style, and I will certainly read more by her. Last thing that I fitted into the month, and it was literally the last book I read in the month, was Control by Adam Rutherford, which was published in February, and I read it in March. And there's a reason why I had to kind of snap this up, from the library, hurrah, my wonderful local library, and that's because Rutherford is an academic geneticist. That's his day job. But he also writes for the sort of general reader about science and ideas and so on. And if I give you the full title of this book, you'll understand what it's about. So it's Control: The Dark History and Troubling Presence of Eugenics. Now, the reason I had to read this book, was fascinated to read it, was because my father was a geneticist, and like many other, as Rutherford explains, sort of bright young men at the very beginning of the 20th century, because he was born in like 1917, okay, he was quite attracted by the ideas of eugenics, and that was what kind of led his interest and how he ended up actually becoming, a medical geneticist and doing, very worthwhile work in that field. And his ideas about eugenics were somewhat shaken by, his experiences in the Second World War as a doctor, but what we all found out then about how the Germans, used eugenics horrifically. What Rutherford does that I appreciated and found really interesting was try and kind of steer away between understanding why people were attracted by eugenics, why it was so horrendous, what dreadful things were done because of it, but equally that we can't get away from the fact that an awful lot of sort of science that we now rely on also came out of people who had, that was part of their motivation. So that's hence the sort of troubled present of eugenics, because we can't, it's like we can't not use things that were done by people who many of their ideas we now find abhorrent. That's it, which is true in other realms of science, isn't it? But probably particularly true around genetics and eugenics. And that felt like a very fitting book to read at the end of March, because one of the things that will be informing my reading in April is that it's the Disability Readathon, and obviously that just sort of, I don't know, throws into relief the outrageous horrors that came from eugenics, alongside some really useful science that some of those early eugenicists ended up producing. Really interesting topic, you can see, and a difficult one for me. So that was my March. So long ago, I'm not going to ask you about yours. I will do May TBR soon, because it's late April, and I'm going to do that Scallydandle to Wales with One Moonlit Night, because I really want space to enthuse about that book properly.